Epoxy injection. You all should have a crack gauge. This is the epoxy, sample of the epoxy that we use. I was not given a real good impression of epoxy injection from my predecessor when I was learning, and I don't think he had real good experiences with epoxy injection, but I think the problems are probably self-inflicted wounds. We're probably going to be revising our epoxy injection special provision. But basically what you're wanting to do is take a crack and get it cleaned out, fill it completely up with epoxy, and mend back together two sections of concrete. It's injected under high pressure into the cracks through ports, and you can have pressures up to as high as 200 psi. I think we require the contractor's equipment to be capable of at least 150 psi. All right, here is some of the problems you might have. Again, preparation, surface preparation on anything you do is so very important. You can't overstress it. Whether you're doing a deck overlay, a concrete repair, epoxy injection, whatever. You can't overstress the importance of this. If you don't do it right, again, everything you've done may be for nothing. You can see here they've done a real good job cleaning along the crack. You don't have to go crazy and clean everything. You want to get a strip clean enough to where you're going to be putting this epoxy on. And the epoxy is going to bond well enough to hold in the epoxy you're injecting up to that 150, 200 psi. The gentleman we had taken a class from said that paint on the wall, you got about 20 psi is your bond strength. We're going to be injecting at 150 to 200 psi, so we need to get it nice and clean. So the surface seal can be a big problem. This air pressure check. After they get everything sealed up, they can close all these ports off, run compressed air in it, and they can likely tell if they have a problem. Sometimes they'll do that, sometimes they won't. We'll see what happens if you have a crack that you didn't get sealed up. This is a pretty good cleaning job that they've done. But this one, you can see there's paint and stuff left. That 20 psi is not going to fare very well when we get pumping epoxy back into that crack. These are two ports. This one was taken off, and it's taken some grout with it, some paste off the top of the concrete. That's good. This one over here popped off because they didn't clean good, and there was some contamination underneath the epoxy, and it popped off during the process. Aaron, what do we do if you pop a port during an injection?
Stop.
Stop. I'm going to have to lick that cafe again. This is an ideal setup right here. When you get everything nice and clean through this section, hopefully a little wider than your epoxy, you get about an inch wide strip over that crack, 3/16 of an inch thick, and that's supposed to be the ideal cap for this crack before you start your injection. Here, the highest pressure you're going to have is going to be right around the port, so you can see the amount of epoxy up around it. Now, and here's a real nice job. You can see the border of where they clean real good. They've got a nice application of epoxy on there. With epoxies, whether it be what you'll talk about here in a little bit, or whether it be some sort of subsurface repair, make sure it's mixed correctly according to the manufacturer's recommendations, because place epoxy most likely is going to fail is if it was not properly mixed. That's normally where you're going to see a failure. If you're doing a pull-out test or anything else on a dowel, most likely if it fails, it's going to be because somebody didn't mix it right. Here, they didn't know that crack was there until after they started injecting. If they'd done an air test, they might have caught that. But you can see we've got epoxy weeping out of this crack that they didn't see, that they didn't get sealed up. So that happens, you're not going to get it injected all the way through the crack. This is what our specification says. We have got this, I think we've got a misconception on how things are actually working inside that crack. We're calling for injecting down here just bottom port and injecting until we get epoxy coming out of this next one, lock it off and keep walking up the repair. But what you find, what you figure out is these cracks are normally going to be a lot wider at the face of the concrete than they are back at the back of the member. So epoxy, water, whatever the liquid is going to follow the path of what? Least resistance. So it would most likely start running up this way a whole lot quicker than going back. So you may get return at this port before you've ever finished all this up. So we're going to, that's another one of the specifications we're going to look at possibly for revision. Now you got I gave you a crack gauge too. Basically what you can do is take that, if somebody's asking you how big is the crack, you can lay that down on top of the crack, match the line up to the width of your crack and be able to have a conversation with somebody on the phone. I've got a crack that's 4 mils wide. What our specification also says is this port spacing. If I've got a foot thick wall, my ports are not supposed to be any farther apart than 1 foot. If I have now do you think that's sufficient? If I've got a 3 foot thick cap, do you think a port 3 feet apart on the face of it I was injecting would be sufficient? I think the proper logic is not going to be based on the member, but on the crack width. That's probably going to be the better indicator. That may be something else that gets revised in that special provision. So you run into injection, this is a conversation that you ought to have beforehand with one of these guys sitting around the wall. Your resident engineer, whoever.
Cameron, I think the provision says no closer than the minimum dimension.
Is it no closer?
So if it's 3 feet, our provision says you don't want to put a port at 1 foot or 1.5 foot. That's the way our provision reads. But depending on the size of the crack, you may need to make them smaller, closer together.
That makes sense. Here's just a picture of core, and you see how wide it is up here. I think it's just kind of runs out somewhere back there. This is how you check. This is the only way that, especially if you're on something like a back wall, you can't seal both sides of the back wall. You can't check. I mean, if you're on a member where you could get to both sides and seal both sides of it, you could put ports on both sides and see if you had return coming all the way through the member. But if you're on an indent, you got sides there you're not going to be able to seal up. The only way you're going to be able to tell if you got epoxy all the way through and repaired the entire crack is to take a core.